Disney Who, Season 1, Episode 2, The Devil's Chord. The episode opens with a piano lesson in 1925. The young boy asks his teacher if they can't play something more exciting. The teacher tells the boy he has something the boy might like. It's called The Devil's Chord. This excites the child, and the teacher tells the boy the chord was banned by the church in medieval times in case it allows the devil to enter the room. The teacher plays the chord and says, "Makes you shiver, doesn't it?" And sound causing one to shiver seems to be a common theme this season, since we've had a sound causing shivering and fear in both episodes 1 and 2. The teacher plays some more, and the piano's lid slams shut. From inside the piano comes knocking, like someone knocking on a door, asking to come in. The teacher lifts the lid, and out pops Jinx Monsoon as the Maestro. The Maestro's costume has a piano key print on the collar and sleeves, and reminded me of the seasons when question marks began appearing on the doctor's clothes, which I didn't care for because I always thought they looked clownish. The teacher leaps back from the piano, and the Maestro appears on the piano bench next to the boy. The teacher says to the boy, "Henry, get away from him." And the Maestro replies, "Them." The teacher says, "What?" And the Maestro says, "Me." The teacher again says, "What?" And the Maestro says, "I'm them." The teacher says, "You're who?" And the Maestro mockingly responds, "You're who?" Then turns to the boy and says, "Nice to see you again, kiddo." The teacher says, "You know each other?" And the boy responds, "That's my daddy." The kid's name is Henry Arbinger. H. Arbinger. Harbinger. The Maestro says, "Think of him as my prelude." And now his song is sung. The Maestro waves the hand, and all that's left of the boy are his clothes. Once again, the teacher demands to know, "Who are you?" And the creature responds, "My notation is Maestro." The teacher says, "But what are you?" And the Maestro tells him, "I'm music." The Maestro tells the teacher that he's a genius and the greatest composer who ever lived. It's so sad the teacher never had the luck and never got that break. The teacher tells the Maestro that nobody ever understood him. The Maestro says, "All those melodies stifled and strangled inside you. All those songs you never sang. They sit there still, wrapped around your heart, still beating, wrapped so tight. Would you like me to set them free?" The teacher responds, "I would love that, yes." The Maestro begins to play the piano, and the teacher is lifted off the ground as music notes literally come out of his chest. The Maestro plays until the teacher is empty, lying twitching on the floor. The Maestro wraps the music around their conductor's baton and proceeds to eat it. The Maestro hiccups, and one note escapes their mouth and floats away. The Maestro then looks directly at the camera, says to the audience, "Now," and proceeds to play the Doctor Who theme song. The opening credits play. The theme song ends playing on the jukebox inside the TARDIS. It was a beautiful shot of the Wurlitzer jukebox, really stunning if, like me, you get into that sort of thing. And I'm going to hold on to that because, unfortunately, that was the best part of this episode. Ruby turns to the Disney doctor and tells him she wants to see the Beatles recording their first album. Apparently, one of her mom's girlfriends was really into vinyl, and they used to listen to her records every day after school. So Ruby wants to go see the Beatles recording their very first album. The Disney doctor thinks this is amazing. People always say the Titanic or Mars or Bethlehem, and he's excited because he's never done this before. To their credit, Ruby is the one to point out her clothes needing to be right for the era. The real irony is that what she was wearing would have fit in just fine, but they go put on some posh 60s attire. And there was a lot of excitement and joy in this scene. We had two people very happily playing dress-up, which directly contrasts with Jodie Whittaker's doctor going back in time to meet King James, wearing the same high-water pants and Mork from Ork suspenders she wore in every other episode. Ruby and Disney doctor go outside. They do the Abbey Road album cover walk across the street. We do learn that Abbey Road Studios were called EMI Recording Studios in 1963, so I learned some trivia that I did not know before. They go inside the building and borrow the tea cart from the tea lady in order to get into the studio where the Beatles are recording. Ruby tells the tea lady that Janet sent her to take over. After the woman walks away, Ruby tells the Disney doctor there's always a Janet. They get into the recording studio and hear the music being played by the Beatles. They're singing a song about a dog named Fred. This is clearly not any Beatles music Ruby or the Disney doctor have ever heard. And I'll just get this out of the way now. There is no Beatles music in this episode. I don't know if they couldn't license any, or if they even tried to do so, but there isn't any, so if you're expecting to hear a single Beatles song in this episode with the Beatles, you're not going to get any. Ruby and Disney Doctor are confused. They run around the building, checking other studios, and discover the same problem all over the building. There is something profoundly wrong with the music. They go to the cafeteria and notice no one tapping their feet, people aren't whistling. Ruby points out that you can't lose music or steal it or kill it. Music is natural. You get music when the wind blows through the trees. The Disney Doctor tells her it's called Aeolian tones. Music is the highest form of thought, and if you take that away... He then opens the newspaper and sees the headline indicating that the Soviets are threatening Finland. The Disney Doctor says, that never happened. He turns to Ruby and tells her that if the music is gone, then everything is changing. The whole human race is taking a different path. Ruby and the Disney Doctor ask John Lennon and Paul McCartney about what's happening. They learn that being a musician is now an embarrassing and shameful profession, and this started in the 20s or 30s. The Disney Doctor asks Paul McCartney if he has better songs tucked away in the back of his mind, songs that will lift or devastate. McCartney confesses that he has 5 notes that come to him, and they feel like the most holy thing on earth. He tells the Disney Doctor the notes and sings the tune. Everyone in the cafeteria stops and looks at them, and Disney Doctor drops his spoon. In the reflective surfaces, we see the maestro's face looking back. McCartney and Lennon get angry and storm out of the room. In the next scene, the Disney Doctor has a piano lifted to the roof of the building. Up on the roof, the Doctor points out where he and his granddaughter Susan are living in 1963. Ruby is shocked by this. The Disney Doctor tells Ruby they can't go visit because of timelines. Ruby states, "You've got children," and the Disney Doctor says, "He did have, he will have. Time Lords get a bit complicated." Ruby asks the Disney Doctor where his granddaughter is in Ruby's time. And the Disney Doctor tells Ruby he doesn't know. Ruby asks him, "How do you not know?" The Disney Doctor tells her the Time Lords were murdered. Genocide rolled across time and space, like a great big cellular explosion. Maybe it killed her too. Ruby takes this very seriously and says, "Doctor, God," and pulls him into a hug. Disney Doctor laughs. So I have to stop right there? I don't know if this was a bad direction, bad writing, or bad acting, but unless the Doctor is a psychopath, this was a really bizarre delivery of the lines conveying all his people being dead, and his reaction to Ruby's sympathy was wrong. Maybe Davies is setting us up for this Disney Doctor to be evil, but it's still Disney, so that doesn't make a lot of sense. But nothing else about this makes sense either. In the discussion after the recap, we will come back to this and compare it to similar scenes with Christopher Eccleston as the 9th Doctor. Anyway, the piano is on the roof. Disney Doctor wants Ruby to play, and she's reluctant. But at least this nods back to the Christmas episode where we saw Ruby playing the keyboard in a band. The Disney Doctor tells Ruby that at this point in time, she is the only music in the world. Let's see what happens if you bring music back. Ruby plays a song she wrote for a friend when a girl broke her friend's heart. People in nearby buildings open their windows and listen to Ruby play. There's a crashing sound and the piano pulls away from Ruby. The piano's lid begins to open and we hear the toy maker's laugh coming from within. The Disney Doctor grabs Ruby and runs before the thing inside the piano gets out. As they run, Disney Doctor tells Ruby, "That was the giggle, and they've gotta hide." Ruby says, "You never hide," which is ridiculous because he did the same run and hide in the previous episode. She's seen him run and hide more times than she's actually seen him take something head on. So, whatever. The Disney Doctor tells Ruby he can't fight this thing. The Maestro is chasing after them with a tuning fork, yelling about music belonging to them, as in them, the Maestro. The Disney Doctor gets out his ergonomic sonic device and uses it to cancel out all the sound. The Maestro is confused by this, but then places the tuning fork into a puddle of water and breaks the spell. The ergonomic sonic device sputters and dies. An elderly woman who had listened to Ruby playing the piano goes to her own piano and begins to play. This attracts the Maestro, who draws the woman's curtains on the audience before attacking her. The Disney Doctor tells Ruby that thing must be part of the Pantheon, and tells Ruby there are vast powers beyond the universe. Defeating the toy maker took everything. It literally tore his soul in half, and he can't survive that again. The Disney Doctor tells Ruby that the toy maker warned Disney Doctor that his legions were coming. Ruby says, "What about the Sonic?" And the Disney Doctor tells her one trick. One. That's all you get with the gods. The Disney Doctor realizes, with this thing stealing music, that the whole world could slide into the pit. Ruby doesn't grasp the gravity of the situation, so the Disney Doctor takes her back to 2024, where they find a nuclear wasteland. The Disney Doctor tells her This is what we're trying to stop. Ruby's still having a hard time accepting it, but the Disney doctor explains that this is Ruby's home if the maestro isn't stopped. The Disney doctor explains that without music, the human race goes sour. Without any way of expressing a broken heart, they go to war without even knowing why. There was so much potential here, but it was absolutely squandered. Because then the camera pulls away, and we see the maestro's foot standing nearby. We're no longer in post-apocalyptic London, but a black stage with lights shining down. The maestro is playing the piano and figures out who the Disney doctor is. The Lord Temporal, who trapped Maestro's father and bound him in salt. The maestro is the child of the toy maker. The maestro tells the Disney doctor that they should thank him because Daddy was so bad to them, and this is delivered in a very scary and angry way. Then the maestro sings a song about how awful Daddy was. The maestro is the essence of music itself, which I would have thought to have been more neutral when it comes to good and evil, but this creature is downright malevolent. Ruby demands to know, with music gone, how is that a win? The maestro yells, "Not gone, hush," and they all listen to the sound of nuclear winter. The maestro says this is the purest music of all. The Disney doctor says, "Aeolian tones, music without the need of people." The maestro tells them that every song that goes unsung feeds the maestro. And this reminded me of the weeping angels feeding on lives that didn't get lived, or the episode with Clara and the leaf. Again, creatures feeding on lost potential. So the maestro gets stronger with every stolen song, and is going to eventually grow strong enough to reach out and steal the music of the spheres. Then the universe will stop turning. Aeolian tones across the whole of creation, and that will be the maestro's Symphony Supreme. The Disney doctor asks how the maestro entered the world, and the maestro refuses to tell. Disney doctor gets angry and shouts at the maestro that their father established the rules of fair play. One thing that he would never do is cheat, and the Disney doctor has a right to know. The maestro stops, turns around and says, "A genius found the lost chord." The Disney doctor says, "Which means a different combination of notes would banish you?" The maestro says, "I said genius," and said a few other things, but the Disney doctor is no genius. The maestro plays the piano, and the lights inside the TARDIS start flashing. The maestro can control anything that resonates, including the TARDIS. The only thing the TARDIS can do is take them back to 1963, so that's where they go. Disney Doctor and Ruby run back into the music studio, so the Disney Doctor can try to find the chord that will banish the maestro. Ruby is standing in the booth, and the Disney doctor is in the recording area tuning John Lennon's guitar. But before he can start playing, the maestro's music notes wrap around Ruby's legs and drag her off. The Disney doctor chases and finds Ruby hanging in the air, and the maestro pulling her music out of her. The music flows, and the maestro is stunned by what comes out. There's a hidden song deep inside Ruby's soul, and that song is the Carol of the Bells, the song sung on the night of Ruby's birth, and snow begins to fall inside the room. The maestro asks, how could a song have so much power, and power like him? The Disney doctor asks, like who? Maestro replies, the oldest one. On the night of her birth, he can't have been there. What for? The Disney doctor asks, who was there? But Maestro doesn't answer. Maestro says, enough, and releases Ruby. The Disney doctor catches her as she falls. The maestro walks over to Ruby and says, this creature is very wrong. The Disney doctor shouts, this is very, very right. Runs over to the piano and says, this is the famous Abbey Road piano, the Mrs. Mills piano. It's the piano upon which the Beatles will play their greatest hits. And the Disney doctor starts rattling off titles because it's not like we're going to get to hear a single one of them in this episode. The Disney doctor plays the piano to send the maestro back to hell. The maestro picks up a violin and they have a music battle. Music notes are flying off the instruments. Ruby joins the Disney doctor at the piano, and away they go. Eventually, the maestro breaks the violin and yells. The Disney doctor then begins playing single notes. The maestro begins to mock him, asking if the Disney doctor can find the right chord. Is he enough of a genius? The Disney doctor responds that he would never call himself that, but he has lived and he has loved, and he can only smile the way he does because he has lost so much. He's experienced everything, every single thing, and if that's where music comes from. And the Disney doctor begins to play the chord to send the maestro back to hell, the damning notes hanging crystal in the air. The maestro laughs as the wave of each note hits, but the Disney doctor gets the final note wrong. This allows the maestro to recover and send the piano flying out of the room and down the hall. The Disney doctor and Ruby get trapped inside a cello and a drum. Meanwhile, down the hall, John Lennon and Paul McCartney come upon the piano with the crystal notes hanging above, and they play the banishing chord. The piano takes off down the hall and heads for the Maestro. Music comes out of the piano and wraps around the Maestro. Ruby and the Disney doctor are freed as the Maestro is swallowed by the piano. With the Maestro's last words, they tell the Disney doctor and Ruby that the one who waits is almost here. The Disney doctor and Ruby go up to the roof and listen to the music coming from the city below. The Disney doctor and Ruby are both happy that the music has returned, but then the Disney doctor tells Ruby there's always a twist at the end, and Disney doctor looks into the camera at the audience and smiles. Then we get the musical song and dance number at the end of the episode. During the dancing, the little boy from the beginning peeks out of one of the doors into the hallway, sees what's going on, and wisely goes back into the room. The dance number ends, and Ruby and Disney doctor head back to the TARDIS. They recreate the piano scene from Big, using the Abbey Road crosswalk as the piano. They then get back into the TARDIS. The end. Well, I guess I'll just start this episode by saying there was a really weird contrast between the delivery of his people being gone that came from Disney Doctor versus what we got from Christopher Eccleston when he was having to relay this information to Rose. I did not expect Disney Doctor to laugh after he told Ruby about what happened and she was showing sympathy and pulled him into a hug, but that's exactly what happened. He made light of the situation, and it wasn't in a way that you get when people just don't want to deal with something. It was weird like you'd get from a psychopath. I really saw a lot of potential in this episode, but there were some really strange things that should have been addressed or could have been addressed. I just feel like this was sloppy because obviously music is resonance. What those Beatles were singing with the dog Fred, that was still music. I mean, that was more like you would get from a child, but that was still music expressing emotion. So I don't understand why that still existed, but the rest of their songs were gone. So there were things in this that I felt were very contradictory. That didn't sit well with me. I really wish this had been better done because I feel like this could have been a very interesting topic, but that's not what we got. Again, this was very disjointed and, as I said, sloppy. Usually Russell Davies writes better than this, or at least he used to, so maybe this is just what he does now. I was very disappointed, and I'm just gonna say this. Jinx Monsoon as the villain, I think that was a really bad choice because I personally would have liked to have seen that character, the essence of music, I wish would have been a good guy. And I don't mean to gender by saying guy, I just mean like in general, like the good guy versus the bad guy. I wish that we had seen that performance instead. If you're trying to convince people that they don't need to be afraid of things that are different from themselves, then you shouldn't try to scare them with that thing because you're not going to get them to embrace it. You're just going to scare them more. Usually fear turns into anger and often hatred. And there's a way to bring people over to your side to let them know that things are safe, that it's okay. And this was not it. To me, this was obvious that they're not trying to convince anyone of anything. All they want to do is be in your face and be nasty. And this is all about just lashing out and punishing people. I think that's harmful to everyone when you behave that way. I don't care what the situation is. You don't have the right to lash out at people who never did a damn thing to you. There were a few things that also happened in this episode that I wish they would have talked about, because I do feel that the state of music these days is crap. And I think that's largely, at least in the United States, due to our consolidation of the media. There's not a lot of competition with like radio stations. And I'm sure a lot of people will say, oh, well, it's streaming now, so what's the point? Well, the thing is that when you've got iHeartRadio owning radio stations all over the United States, Canada, and I think they're in Australia too, possibly more, they dictate what the playlists are. So you don't have programming managers going out and finding local talent, playing in local clubs and bars. So what you're getting is manufactured music by executives putting together bands like we saw in the 90s. That's when this stuff really started. I mean, obviously you can go back to the Monkees, and that was a manufactured band. They didn't play their own instruments or anything either. But then you started seeing executives pairing kids up, and all they did was sing and dance. And all of a sudden, they were a band, and they were all over the radio. I think that what you get now is entertainers. It's not really musicians. Because how many of them play their own instruments? How many of them write their own songs? And then the songs that they do sing tend to be written by committee. Like a huge number of people in the credits on a single song. So you're not really getting a single person's emotions. So what they were talking about in this episode as far as songs that allow you to release the pain of, say, a breakup, what we're getting is corporate music by committee of acceptable feelings. And that's just not authentic music. That's not music from your heart or your soul. So I wish we had talked about that in this episode instead of what we did get. I just feel like this is another miss, a big miss, where they could have talked about something that was really important, but they didn't. And I blame Russell Davies for that. Of course, probably getting into bed with Disney didn't help either.
Overall, I think this episode, for me anyway, was better than the first episode. Not so much what they actually did deliver, but there was potential here. That first episode, other than rewriting the whole concept of the space babies, there wasn't much to do there. It was, in my opinion, a garbage script that was meant for itty-bitty kids. Here, I think there was a lot of potential to do something, because a lot of what you said, Molly, I agree with. The question I would ask you, though, or ask anybody listening, so the Beatles, reenacting the keyboard scene from Big. We've already established they're shooting for kids. Is that really targeting that group? I mean, I would argue that's targeting Gen Xers, possibly boomers. That's what that's targeting. So they already scared them away with that first episode. This episode here, I think would have done better to be the first episode of the season. Because I think there was a more mature audience that this was aiming for. And I don't know why they put that horrible space babies first. Now, I do not understand what they were trying to do with this Jinx Monsoon character of music embodied. This character was anger and hatred, and honestly, every scene that this character appeared in, the scene came completely to a halt. Because there were several times that I was starting to get into this episode. When they were in that cafeteria and the doctor was talking to, was it Paul McCartney? They were getting ready to talk about something that was interesting to me. And then he looked at that spoon and saw that heat miser in there. And it took the scene gone, done. Or when Disney Doctor took Ruby to 2024 and saw what happened after a nuclear war. And we were starting to get a feeling for that environment, and I was starting to get invested in what they were talking about. And then that red thing appeared again. I don't know Jinx Monsoon. I don't know who that is, but I don't know who a lot of pop culture actors are now, so that doesn't mean anything. So I don't know what this person normally does as far as acting, but this over-the-top, angry yelling, it reminded me like in the 80s when I used to watch professional wrestling. And you had the professional wrestlers who had their little interviews, and like they would yell into the microphone and stare at the camera. And sometimes they would do some funny stuff. In the 80s, they would have very bright colored outfits on with boas and pink and green and all that if you're talking latter 80s and early 90s. And it was amusing. I mean, I didn't really care for wrestling per se, but those little segments were funny. And I think that's what this person's known for, is that type of things. I think. But the performance was so narrow. It was just yelling and scaring people. And how is that music? I'm hoping maybe as time ticks on here for episodes, we're going to find out that creature was lying. And that it did not represent a personification of music at all. Because music is some of the best parts of human beings. And that's the best part of a human being, was that? I'm hoping maybe there's a balance to that and that creature was lying about what it was. I thought this could have been interesting. They set up kind of a prohibition or, from the 80s, a Footloose type scenario where, music or dancing was outlawed. And I thought this could have been more interesting if music was outlawed and maybe the Beatles were in this underground club, kind of like a speakeasy. And there was a Red Dwarf episode where they had something like this, but instead of it being clubs that did underground music, they did underground technology. And so having a place where the Beatles, maybe underground, worked in these places because that's all they could do their music, but they were still pursuing music. Again, this goes back to last episode when I talked about the fixed points in time and why I like that concept. Because even though this entity changed the way history unfolded in the 60s, the whole point of the fixed points in time is that those fixed points are still going to happen. There's just going to be events that kind of force those events to happen. So having the Beatles working underground and Disney Doctor and Ruby getting involved with that, maybe going through those clubs and stuff and just seeing how human beings handle music when it's forbidden to them, I think could have been interesting. I'm not saying I necessarily wanted that story here as far as if I could pick any story to make, but since that's the premise of what this was, because those of you who are familiar with, let's say, the Next Generation of Star Trek, and are familiar with the Q character, and this was very similar to the Q character from Star Trek The Next Generation. The way Picard would defend against Q's allegations when Q would talk about human beings being these barbaric people that have never grown, all they want to do is hurt each other, they're a plague upon all living creatures, is Picard would usually go off and explain the great artists, the great writers, the great composers that show that human beings have potential to be so much greater. And I thought something like that was going to happen here, because I think that's what they were trying to do here. They just didn't pull it off. And I did appreciate, like Molly mentioned, that at least there was a little bit of character development here with Ruby. Because in the Christmas episode, the only thing we knew about her, other than being a foundling, was that she played the keyboard in a band. So she has some musical talent. So I appreciated that she was using that musical talent in this musicless era. But I also agree with Molly that even when the Beatles were singing that rather simplistic song, that was still music. It may not have been a very good song or very simplistic lyrics, but it was still music. It wasn't like it was banned because they were doing some music.
It would have been far more interesting if they had done something similar to A Quiet Place, the film, where the aliens landed and everyone had to learn to speak with sign language because, well, if the aliens heard you, that was it. That could have been a very interesting thing to do if they had done it that way, but they didn't. And, like you just said and I said earlier, everything, any kind of sound can be music. So I don't understand what they thought they were doing here. If they wanted to get rid of all music, all sound would have had to go. And even then, you could have discussions about what constitutes music, especially if you start factoring in, say, the deaf community. I feel like this was sloppy. Like, there was so much more they could have done. They could have been so much more creative with this, and they just did the lazy, sloppy thing.
And the year that they appeared in, and him, the Disney Doctor, pointing out that Hartnell Doctor was in this time. Like, he even pointed where he was with his granddaughter Susan. There was so much potential there to do something. Even if you didn't meet your other self, just meeting Susan would have been interesting. But that was just a throwaway Easter egg.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed because I thought maybe that was going somewhere. And also, going along with what you said in the recap, Molly, why did they pick the Beatles if they weren't going to license any Beatles music? If this really was supposed to be, because an argument could be made, well, even though this wasn't aimed at musicians that 7, 8, 9-year-olds would be familiar with, that this is educational. They're learning about the Beatles. Like you mentioned, you learned about the record label stuff. But you didn't expose them to any Beatles music. So I would argue you didn't really educate anybody on the Beatles. If it was a matter of money, which it seems like Disney was going to throw tons of money at this, but let's pretend you were very limited. Why couldn't you license one song? Pick a Beatles song that you think fit the moment. And instead of having that everything has a twist at the end, that was a cringy act. I have no way of describing to somebody how horrible that was, that musical act. It wasn't so much that it was a musical, it's what they were performing and what they were doing. It just seemed so amateurish. It was so bad.
And it didn't seem to fit. It was tacked on at the end. What was the point? Other than to say, oh, we used twerking to defeat the enemy.
They had a musical number.
Yeah.
This was like when Star Trek Strange New Worlds,
Ugh.
they were bragging about having that musical episode. Which, we have a long video about that, expressing how Buffy and Xena did that in the late 90s and early 2000s, because despite what people think, Buffy was not the first fantasy sci-fi place to do that. Xena did that in 1998.
Yep. And I just have to say, my favorite musical is Dr. Horrible's Sing-Along Blog, starring Neil Patrick Harris and Nathan Fillion, along with Felicia Day, but still, Neil Patrick Harris. So this is definitely not that I have a problem with any of the actors chosen for this, or even like the musical part. Because if it had been done okay, if it had been done competently, or God forbid, if it had been done well, then you know what? I think a lot of people would have accepted it, just as they did with Xena and Buffy. All right, well, maybe not a lot of people, but some people.
What I said in that episode of Strange New Worlds is even if they would have done that competently, which they did not, they didn't earn that right.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Both Buffy and Xena, when they did it, when they deviated from their normal thing, they had seasons of doing things correctly. So they earned a little artistic liberty. Russell Davies, with his Disney hat on, has not earned anything at this point, so this shouldn't have happened. However, playing a Beatles song at the end that whatever Russell thinks fits the moment, there's plenty of a catalog there to pick from the Beatles. I think just licensing one song would have made a difference, because without having licensed music, this just reminded me of some knockoff cover band.
Yeah, because they all could have danced to that one licensed song. And that actually could have been a fitting end to the episode.
The educational potential of teaching children about the Beatles and the 60s was squandered here. Because in addition to not having proper Beatles music, they didn't really introduce you to any 60s culture. I don't know when this was filmed. I mean, I assume it was post-pandemic, but the streets were empty. There were no people.
There were no cigarettes.
Yeah, having people smoking and walking down the street, that would have made this feel more like the 60s.
Yeah. That lady in the canteen/cafeteria, she referenced something that I didn't recognize, so I don't know if that was her and she was that thing back in the 60s. I don't know. I'm sure it must have meant something, but to us, I have no idea.
Well, let's just pretend that the way time changed and everybody was told to hide indoors. I don't know why. Let's just say that was one of the changes that Jinx Monsoon's character did. Why would you do that if you're supposed to be educating people, kids, about the 60s, about the Beatles? Why would you purposely go out of your way to put people inside like that? Because this did not feel like they were in the 1960s. In fact, when they came out of the TARDIS with their outfits on, to me this felt like this was some Austin Powers knockoff or something. Like they were doing that for humor, not to try to fit in. Because it reminded me a little bit, the stories were quite different, but the Idiot's Lantern, if you remember that from the Russell Davies era, and they were showing up for the coronation in early 50s. The UK people here are probably going to kick my butt for not knowing I'm going to guess 53. And if I'm wrong, come at me in the comments and say, you stupid American. But they were wearing stuff then. There were some jokes at the beginning, but then they ended quickly. But this seemed like, just looking at those two, they were just like playing an Austin Powers game. Like they were winking at the camera about, look how stupid I can look in these outfits. Because although what they both wore were in style at the time, other less ridiculous fashions were also in style at that time.
Well, as I said, the mini dress that Ruby was wearing before she changed, it was an acceptable style for the 60s. That's actually where that style came from. So what she was wearing would have been perfectly appropriate back then. And that was before she changed.
I mean, even her hair, you probably would have had to do a little bit, like maybe pull the hair back or something, but hairstyles I don't think are the big deal. If somebody has a futuristic hairstyle, I don't think that's going to be the giveaway that somebody's going to go, ha-ha, because it's not like they have like futuristic pieces inside their hair, like futuristic barrettes or something, because I didn't get that either. I mean, Shooty had to change into something a little bit different, but even the bright colored stuff he had on, I know it was the early 60s, but you probably could have gotten away with some of that without changing like he did. And then he got a little bit of the longer hair, and it's, I don't know, it seemed like they were playing that more for, let's do Austin Powers, have some humor at the expense of fashion, and less about, let's educate people about the 1960s.
Yeah, let's play dress up. That's what it felt like to me.
Was that a fatal thing here? No. I mean, what they did do was not horrible. It just seemed unnecessary to have to go to that extent to do that. Like we said last week with the butterfly effect, because they dress like this, they could put them in the trailers and they could show, look how different we're putting these people this week.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, you did mention that the Jodie Whittaker era, the other end of this, because that was such a wasted era. Because Jodie Whittaker, her doctor being female, and her traveling back in time to different places, even if she wasn't wearing that clown outfit, because the clown outfit broke immersion. That's like, I don't even know what Chibnall was thinking by keeping her in those outfits in the different eras in the past. But they could have told stories that were pro-female, about pointing out about how, you've got this woman taking charge in eras where normally that wasn't accepted. And without beating you over the head with it, you could have educated people about certain things about how women were treated in different time periods. But when she's wearing that clown outfit, any lesson they were trying to teach us, it's like, I'm not listening to that. You look like you escaped from some sort of mental ward, and I'm not going to listen to you. I think in one of those episodes they made a joke like that. It's like, I'm not listening to you looking ridiculous like that. And speaking of the way people dress and look, back in the Russell era 1.0, going back to the end of the world and going back to Cassandra, one of the lessons that was being taught there, whether it was on purpose or accidental, was you had this flap of skin with eyes, a mouth, and a brain in a jar. And for the most part was played off for laughs and was harmless. And it turned out Cassandra turned out to be a really not nice entity. So there was a lesson there about don't judge a book by its cover, which I realize that's a lesson that's taught over and over again, but I think it's an important lesson. What they presented with that Jinx Monsoon, I don't know. I mean, that person looked scary and unbalanced from the get-go, and unless they do something later on in the series, that's all you're being taught, is that thing was at face value what it was. And I'm saying it because it was a personification of music. I mean, I guess I technically should, I think the person chose they as their pronoun. And see, that's another thing too. The very first scene of this episode, there was the potential to do some education about a modern day thing. Right now we're dealing with this idea of using different pronouns and people choosing their own pronouns, which as an older person, I'm struggling with because I get to choose my proper noun. I don't know why I'm able to choose what the third person pronoun is that somebody refers to me as. But I'm old and I'm open to education. So at the beginning there, I thought, and they did a little bit, but it wasn't anything that was useful, when that teacher was talking, the piano teacher was talking to Jinx Monsoon, and there was the potential there for an Abbott and Costello who's on first type setup, which if done carefully could have been very educational for those of us that are struggling with pronoun usage in this new way of using pronouns. But they didn't do anything with that. You just had this person that was just angry about stuff and just being a jerk. Because to me, this looked like they took Q from Star Trek, The Next Generation, and mixed it with Batman's Joker, and then maybe took a little bit of Bette Midler from
Hocus Pocus
and the Heat Miser from that claymation thing.
A Year Without a Santa Claus.
And like that's all you got. It was a clown. It was a wasted opportunity to actually educate people, because if done correctly, I'm willing to listen to some education on that topic. I'm an older person. So if you want to educate me on that, do so. But I'm guessing because Russell's as old as he is, maybe he doesn't have the ability to educate me on this topic, because we're closer in age than I would be to somebody who's younger, a younger writer on this. So I thought that was a wasted opportunity to do actual education, not so much for teaching a kid about the Beatles, but maybe teaching somebody my age about these new pronouns, so that maybe I can get a better understanding. That would have been a nice educational thing for me to watch, but they blew that opportunity.
Well, again, this comes back to what I've been saying. Do you really want to help people understand so that they're more accepting, or do you just want to go around punishing people? And to me, it's clear that they have zero interest in making the world a better place. They just want to go around spewing anger and punishing people for something that nobody who's getting punishment actually did.
Look what Shooty and Russell are doing on Twitter and in interviews. They're spewing all this hatred. They're making horrible assumptions about people. Maybe the reason people don't like your take on the Doctor is because you're telling stories that are meant for like 7-year-olds.
And you're just retelling stories you've told before.
You know what, Shooty? You've only been in 2 episodes, well now 3 episodes of this thing. Because I don't really count the Bi-Generation episode as something you were in, because you were barely in it. So maybe this has very little to do with you at all, whether you're an actor or you haven't had enough to actually show what you can do. Maybe this is more a critical take on Russell, because we've seen 4 seasons of Russell Davies previously, and most of that work was good. There was the occasional not good, but most of that was good. We are now 3 episodes and 3 anniversary specials, and Russell Davies, it seems like he was kidnapped by somebody else, because we have his body of work from before, and I'm going to make up a number, but let's say he had a 75% success rate at what he was putting out there.
I think it was actually higher.
Well, I do too, but let's just be conservative about it. There is not a single thing in all 7 of these entries that he has, well 6 I guess, because this is episode 2. So what we have is we have a sampling of this new Russell Davies of 3 anniversary specials, a holiday special, and 2 Disney Doctor Who. And the success rate on that is 0. Maybe the one where they had the long arms, like there was a part of that episode that I actually did like and felt like it was calling back to some of the better Russell Davies era, but it didn't last long. He ruined it with this other crap he stuck in there. So maybe, Shooty, people aren't complaining about you so much as the Doctor. Maybe what we're complaining about is somebody who had like a 75% success rate is now batting 0, whiffing every time they've gone to bat. Maybe that's the complaint, and then getting angry online at people because we're pointing out this stuff is crap. I would love for Russell to get his head out of his backside with all this blaming other people and say, you know what, I can do better. I can do better than this. And as I just said a few minutes ago, I can't speak for everybody else, But I'm open to you educating me, let's say, about current time stuff like neopronouns, if you do it correctly and don't lecture me, but you actually educate me. So it's not like you can't cover these topics, but it has to be done in good writing and making the stories interesting. And you're not doing any of that. This episode was better than last week's, only for the fact that I see potential here. What did they actually accomplish? Honestly, I don't think what they actually gave us was any better than last week, like the actual result. It was still a bad episode.
Yeah, and you get things like He Who Waits, which is, again, it goes back to the girl who waited. There were so many aspects of this that, like we've already discussed, just feel lifted from previous seasons. And like we said in our previous video, it's like a band that's been together for a long time, and everything they make now is just derivative. And I've seen this happen with authors before. Because one of my favorite book trilogies, I'm not going to say which one, but the author who wrote it is extremely prolific. And I've noticed that this person's writing, they are recycling character names, they're recycling character backgrounds, storylines and things like that. And it's so disappointing because her earlier work was really good. And I've reread that one trilogy over and over and over again, but I can't read anything new from her because, again, I've read all of it before. It's just a mashup of what she's already done. And it's sad when it gets to that point. And I'm wondering if that's where Russell Davies is now.
This is not the same person that gave us 4 seasons of 75% good.
I'm just starting to really lose faith in some of these older writers that maybe they just don't have anything left in them.
That's what I want to see next week in what Moffat has left in him. Because it doesn't have to be perfect. Because these first 2 episodes of this season have been garbage. This one had more potential, but it was still garbage. If all Moffat can deliver next week is an episode where we say, you know what, wasn't the greatest, but that was a nice average episode. Like, I didn't mind sitting through that. If he can just deliver that, and that's a really low bar, then, hey, maybe we can get Stephen Moffat working on more scripts on this series and try to push Russell in the background.
I don't know, the preview we saw has the Disney doctor stepping on what appears to be a landmine, and we've seen that before.
Well, agreed. I'm just curious what that's going to be. Russell's first run was my favorite. And then after that, Moffat was my second favorite. And then right now, I think Chris Chibnall's my third favorite as far as showrunner, because Chris Chibnall's Jodie Whittaker stuff, so far, as bad as it was, it's better than this Russell Davies 2.0. And that's bad. That's how low we've gotten, is when I'm saying Chris Chibnall as showrunner is better than Russell Davies 2.0. And I never thought those words would come out of my mouth, considering Russell Davies' first run is my favorite of the restarted Doctor Who from 2005.
It just makes me so sad because I remember how happy Doctor Who used to make me when Russell first revived the show. I remember how much I connected with Donna Noble in particular because she was, just an average temp just trying to get something going with her career, which is where I was at that point in time. And I can't connect with this at all. This is not working for me. And I was so hopeful when I heard he was coming back that the show would get good again. And it hasn't. Now I'm curious, old man. I gave my take on Disney Doctor conveying to Ruby that basically everybody he ever knew had been genocided. And I compared that to when Christopher Eccleston's Doctor, the Ninth Doctor, conveyed that information to Rose, and I felt that it was strange how Disney Doctor responded when Ruby tried to give him sympathy. Did you have a take on that particular scene?
Well, when I go back and I look at Eccleston's run of Doctor Who, and it was clear that he was suffering from PTSD, and that came out in the episode Dalek when he had that gun and Rose was standing next to that Dalek and he was like, "Get out of the way." And she's like, "Well, you're the one holding the gun here." And that's when it came out and the doctor realized that he was not okay. And I'm hoping maybe in a couple more episodes we're going to get a moment like that from Shudigatwa, because I agree he handled it in a very I'm not going to handle it way. And I think part of the problem with that is Russell just seems to be dumping exposition. So it's clear he's making this a brand new series, a brand new franchise. So he's trying to bring in a bunch of legacy knowledge as quickly as he can. I think the casualty of this is character development, because it's just exposition. So it'll be unfortunate if this is one of those things that suffers as a casualty of just exposition dumping as quickly as you can, because it was strange. And I'm hoping that there's something that's going to fall out in the next few episodes, because there needs to be more
depth.
Yeah, you could make the argument, and I don't agree with this, by the way, that in that episode, was it Wild Blue Yonder, that David Tennant was kind of dealing with that, if you remember when he was talking to fake Donna. But the kids who are watching this, they probably aren't going to watch those 60th anniversaries. So given what was dumped in exposition, I think Shooty probably does need to have a moment or two in the future episodes where he's truly understanding the weight of that.
I agree. I hope that does get addressed, because it made me very uncomfortable the way that he was just so blasé about the genocide that took out all of his people, and then the way he laughed when Ruby tried to give him a hug. That really rubbed me the wrong way. And like you just said, I don't think kids will be going back and watching the 60th anniversary specials. So I really hope that they actually address this a little bit better in a future episode, because that just didn't sit well with me.
We just reviewed Discovery from last week's episode, and we were unhappy with, on paper, when Michael Burnham was going to admit about her mutiny. And in that review of that episode, you mentioned, even if they stuck with the dialogue as it was, just get rid of the laughing, and it probably would have been serviceable. Not great, but serviceable. But when Michael Burnham added that laughing at the end, when basically they were referring to, you committed a mutiny, how'd that work out for you? And she's like, or did that work out for you? And she's like, yeah. It took away from the power of the scene, and it made it seem like she wasn't taking any responsibility for what she did. And I'm hoping that that's just that crap show, and that's not just a Gen Z mindset of
part of a larger problem.
Yeah, that, you're not able to deal with your feelings. You just laugh them off. You don't take responsibility for your actions or other people's actions and the consequences you're having to deal with. So I'm hoping that Discovery is just crap and that this is unrelated. But because I'm not in the Gen Z or Alpha generation, quite removed, that I don't know if that's just part of that generation or if this is just an isolated thing.
Yeah, I'm hoping that maybe it was just an oversight by the director or by Ncuti Gatwa himself. Russell Davies has addressed this before, so if it's an oversight on his part, then I don't know what to say, because he did it so much better when it was Christopher Eccleston's doctor that was dealing with this.
That's the thing, is this is the same-ish story as far as coming out of a war or a great genocide here. This is the same story Russell told in 2005 on the large level here.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was when Ruby told the doctor that he doesn't run away. And I don't know where she got that from, because this is the second episode that we've seen him do just that. So she's actually seen him run away more times than she has seen him stand his ground.
When he was with the goblins, I don't remember him running.
But that's one...
Yeah, it'd be 50-50. So saying you never run away is incorrect.
Exactly. So now she's seen him run away twice and stand his ground once.
Well, I think that was a mistake on Russell's part. He was trying to draw on some lore that was never presented in this new series. Although the Doctor ran plenty of times, in New Who especially, in 2005 Who On, that's kind of a meme of David Tennant running around. That doesn't mean that he doesn't stand his ground at times, but I wouldn't say that David Tennant always stands his ground.
No, there were plenty of times that he ran and hid. Family of Blood is definitely one of those that comes to mind, where he was hiding out at that school, the boarding school for boys, and even put his identity into the pocket watch, and he became human. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that was just an oversight. It was strange.
Well, and there's another point here to kind of back up that I think this should have been the first episode. Because in Space Babies, when he was running, and he was surprised, he's like, well, why am I running? I shouldn't run. I've faced scarier things than this. And it turns out it was some sound that was causing some reaction in him to be fearful. Jinx Monsoon's character used sound music.
That tuning fork.
Yes. So maybe if they would have mentioned in this episode that in the Devil's Chord here, 17 hertz in Space Babies caused a reaction, I just assumed that it was the same thing here, that Jinx Monsoon character, because it was essentially music, that it was emanating that same frequency. So if this is the second episode after Space Babies, the Doctor should know that already. But I would argue he should flip these two things around, the two episodes, because if this would have been the first episode where he's not sure why he's running from this entity, and then in that Space Babies episode, he figures out, oh, it's the 17 hertz that's causing me to run, I think that flows better than what they did do.
I agree. Now, what did you think about the manifestation of the music notes? Like, we actually saw them in the air, and they were attacking people.
If somebody only knew about this series, specifically this Russell Davies Disney series, they might think that was an innovative thing and that, geez, I've never seen something like that before. But if you just go back a few years, I think it was in 2019, we talk about this on our channel every once in a while, but Doom Patrol. And there was the character Jane, who has multiple personalities inside of her, each one that has a mutated ability. And there is the one alter called Silvertongue. And what Silvertongue does is Silvertongue can manifest words, like actually written words, in the air and use those as weapons. And that's essentially what was done here. Had I not seen Doom Patrol, I probably would be impressed a little bit with the innovation that was being done here. But this happened in Doom Patrol, I don't want to say often, but when Silvertongue became dominant in Jane's body, you saw this a lot. There was at least two scenes I can think of. Once in that South American doctor's facility where she was defending Jane and it got pretty bloody as her words, the whole point, again, Silvertongue and her words, which were manifested, were cutting through people. So that's kind of the joke there. And then there was the other time when her and Cliff were having a disagreement and her words were being thrown around. And again, that was a kind of a metaphorical as well as a literal use of how dangerous words can be. So Doom Patrol, I thought, did it much better. In fact, I would argue, we said this with the Toy Maker, but it also applies with the Jinx Monsoon Maestro character. Mr. Nobody played this type of character so much better. Alan Tudyk was meant to play Mr. Nobody. Nobody else, if they would have been put in that role, I think would have worked. So I would recommend, if anybody hasn't seen Doom Patrol, it was based on a comic from the 80s, I believe. Actually, I take that back. I believe it goes all the way back to the 60s, but there was like a rejuvenation in the 80s of these storylines they're covering now. But watching season 1 of Doom Patrol, I think would be a worthwhile watch. It has that 2005 Davies type feel to it, where there's this absurdity mixed in with reality, because I think that's some of the reason I liked season 1 of Doom Patrol, is it felt like if somebody told me that Davies wrote a lot of the scripts, I'd be like, yeah, it feels like it. It had that old Doctor Who absurdist nature to it with a serious undertone. And what they did in this episode here fit in with what they did in Doom Patrol. So I wish maybe this would have happened before I saw Doom Patrol, because I probably would have been more impressed with the physical manifestations of musical notes. What they did here, I mean, there was a little bit of playful fun here, but again, it lost a lot of its charm when Silver Tongue was already in my mind about how that absurd idea could be used.
If you do choose to watch Doom Patrol, though, just keep in mind that it is a bit gory. There are some definite adult themes.
It's not for kids.
And
do not have kids watch this with you.
There is a lot of swearing. So just keep that in mind if you choose to try it. If those things are not your thing, then I would say don't bother, because you won't like it. However, if those things don't bother you, or even you find them humorous, like the swearing, I enjoy that quite a bit, then I say go ahead and try it, because it'll probably be right up your alley.
Yeah, there's a character in this called Cliff. He's a robot. He uses profanity often.
Like a Valley girl says like.
Correct. He uses the F word like a Valley girl would use like.
Yeah. As far as the manifestation of the music notes, I thought that was more like something I would see in Sarah Jane Adventures or Wizards vs. Aliens. So it felt more kids' show to me. But again, Disney Who, kids' show. This definitely is a kids' show.
Well, I think that's why in Doom Patrol it worked for me, because when those words appeared out of nothing in air from Silver Tongue, it was like a comic book, like you were getting comic book captions. So there was a kiddie absurd nature to it, but then when those letters flew and like cut people in half like a sword, that's where it went from being absurd to being extremely grave and dangerous. And I think that's why it worked in Doom Patrol. Here it never... The closest it did was it tied up Ruby.
And dragged her off.
Yeah, but I mean, it was done in such a kiddie way. There was like no other end of this to kind of contrast it with, yes, it's kiddie-like, but then look what kiddie-like does. Similar like the Ghostbusters, the 1984 movie. When you first saw the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, it was funny. And then when you found out how dangerous that thing was, that's that same type of humor. And in this episode, they never went the other type of humor where they went from the, oh my gosh, that's just so absurd, and you never saw the danger of it other than being tied up.
Yeah, there really didn't seem to be any humor in this episode. And considering how absurd a lot of it was, that was weird. I think the closest they got was that Who's on First exchange at the beginning of the episode. Again, that went down a nasty path instead of a humorous path.
I think somebody would argue there was humor in here, because you and I have talked about this off mic. But a lot of what passes for humor now is just what I consider to be cringe humor, where you're making fun of people or you're being mean to somebody. And I think people would say when Jinx Monsoon was yelling at people, I think people think that's funny.
Oh, well, I don't.
I didn't either, but this cringe humor that's been in vogue for a while, somebody might argue that that's humor. I agree with you. The almost Who's on First joke at the beginning of the episode, that was like the only funny thing in here at all.
Yeah. Well, my definition of humor does not involve cruelty, so whatever. And what did you think of that music battle that they had?
When we were watching it, the first thing that I thought of was the Who Framed Roger Rabbit movie. Then we were joking a little bit because later on, or was it before or after when he had the violin, Jinx Monsoon?
Oh, it was after.
Because when Jinx Monsoon picked up that violin, we were talking, and I was starting to recite the lyrics.
Devil went down to Georgia.
Yeah, of the Charlie Daniels song. And, I mean, I guess that added to what was going on.
Yeah, and it reminded me a little bit of the Futurama episode where Fry trades hands with the robot devil so that he could play the holophoner to get Leela to fall in love with him. There were other ways that this could have gone. They played it so serious, in my opinion. The other examples, again, where was the humor? Kids' shows usually have some humor about them. And this one seems like all they had, the music that would tie you up and drag you off.
Well, they shoved like the doctor and the drums and Ruby into...
But I didn't find that funny.
No, I agree. Like, for me, an old man, that's not funny. Jinx Monsoon, except at the very beginning when it could have turned into a Who's on First Abbott and Costello routine, I didn't find it funny at all. But what I'm saying is a lot of what kids think is funny, Velma's a good example of that.
I don't know. Do kids actually find that funny?
Well, I don't know. But like that sort of cruel humor, people seem to find funny. Online anyway.
Yeah.
Hey, let's watch somebody who not only wipes out. I mean, we used to watch stuff like Jackass in the 90s. But this goes beyond that, where people watch on social media, like people getting hit by cars and getting seriously hurt. And they think that's funny. And I don't understand that. Luckily, it doesn't turn into like animals. It seems like at least they're limited to watching people suffering. But I don't know where that humor comes from, because I agree with you. I don't find it funny, but I'm not of a young generation. So my sense of humor is very different than somebody else's. And Russell's humor back in 2005 seemed to align with my sense of humor. And whatever's pushing humor now, Jinx Monsoon was not funny, except maybe toward the beginning, like you said. But if that's what they're counting as funny, or even when they dragged the Doctor and Ruby into those musical instruments, I didn't find that funny. Even from an absurdist nature, I didn't find that funny at all. But I'm an old man.
Yeah, I guess the same applies to when the Maestro would get basically eaten up by the piano. That just, I guess it went along with the same thing. I don't know if that was supposed to be funny or not, but it just struck me as kind of weird.
Well, why a piano? Did they ever say why it was a piano versus some other instrument?
No.
I don't know. The Jinx Monsoon character did not work for me in any way. And the thing is, I don't know this actor. So I'd be open to him playing a role in Doctor Who here, or Disney Who. Just could that person play a different role? Because you and I were talking, instead of this person playing this over-the-top character, maybe this person could have been like a behind-the-scenes kind of subtle watcher of what's going on, and then either as this episode went on, that would assume you'd have people on the street, which they did not have, or other episodes, you just keep seeing this person, kind of like Bad Wolf was in Russell's first run, that maybe you just see this person calmly in the background, and then as the season goes on, this person's, even the visuals would get more and more outrageous to what this entity looked like in this episode. Because this character didn't work for me at all. If this character didn't exist in this episode, I would have a better time enjoying this episode. And it's the way the character was. I can't judge the actor because I don't know who was coming up with these lines or putting this person in this position. So this actor might do quite well in a different role. I don't know.
As I said, I wish that the Maestro had been a neutral force, because music can be anything. You know, it's not good or bad. It just is. So when they made this creature malevolent, that really bothered me. I really wish that they had made this creature more neutral. You know, more like, you know, a trickster kind of creature. And by that I mean like the mythological Puck. No real malice, just
playful.
Playful. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that's not what we got at all. That was very disappointing for me. I guess the last thing I want to say is when Ruby used the Janet maneuver to get that tea cart away from that woman, that really reminded me of the Trailer Park Boys. Because in that, Ricky, he gets out of things by saying, you know Jim, or Jim knows you, and the premise is that everybody knows a Jim, and he can usually manipulate people that way by pretending like he's friends with whoever the Jim is that this person knows. I mean, obviously it was the same maneuver, just with Janet.
There might be like a vaudeville routine going way, way back that has something similar, so I don't want to say the Trailer Park Boys invented this joke, but that's where I remember it too, was from that. And they even went out of their way to explain, because it was one of the side characters, Sarah, that was explaining how Ricky uses that maneuver all the time to get out of trouble, because he just has to throw that name out there. he picked a very generic name, Jim, and then somebody knows a Jim, and then that's the whole joke. But like I said, there might be like an old vaudeville routine, kind of like Who's on First, that we're just not familiar with that covers that.
There must be, because in Venture Brothers, Rusty used it to get into a party because there's always a Gloria. That joke's been going around. I've seen it done with more humor than what I saw in this episode.
It must be just a cultural thing. I don't know the origination of this. If somebody knows what that routine's from, if you could leave it in the comments, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, because obviously we've heard it several places now. Yeah, so if anybody knows where that comes from, let me know, because I want to know.
Would I recommend this episode? I'm going to say no, but it's a less strong no than last week, because I do think there was potential here to do something good, but they didn't do something good. So I can't give a recommendation, even though I think this was less bad than last week. I did appreciate some of the ideas that they had. They were trying ever so slightly to develop Ruby. They were building on her musical job that she had in the Christmas episode. We learned a little bit about, I suppose, Ruby's past when it came to other people. Was it an aunt? Or no, it wasn't an aunt. It was a friend of...
It was her mother's girlfriend.
So she clearly was raised by more than just Carla. So we learned a little bit about Ruby, but again, at this point in Eccleston's run, because the reason I keep going back to Eccleston's run is because that's Russell's previous run of this, and what he did in 2005, bringing Doctor Who back and soft rebooting it, that's what he's doing now. So I think it's absolutely fair game to compare where we are gauging it both now and then. At the end of episode 2, well, episode 3, I guess it would be of 2005 Who, because episode 1 would be mapping to the Christmas episode for this series. What was it? Unquiet Dead, where they had those gas spirits that were inhabiting bodies. At that point, we had a pretty solid understanding of Rose, and we were getting to know Eccleston's doctor pretty well. Look where we are with Ruby right now. She likes music. I mean, I'm going to give credit. She likes music. We knew that in the Christmas special, but I guess we know why she likes music, because she has a childhood history with that. Did we learn anything about Disney Doctor? Anything new, I should say, that we didn't know just by following the franchise? Because I don't think so. I have no idea who this guy is. And I don't mean that in a good way, like, oh, the Doctor, he's supposed to have this mysterious side to him. It's like, no, I don't mean it like that. I mean, he's a slug. He's this blank thing that, hey, act quirky, Disney Doctor, and the Disney Doctor's acting quirky. Well, what's particular about you? Because in a lot of, in fact, I'm trying to think if it's not all of the Doctors, they all have their signature outfits that they wear. I mean, there might be some, as the series goes on, I think they changed Tennant up a little bit. His outfit was basically the same. And Tom Baker in that last season, he got that
maroony thing?
Yeah, with the question marks on it.
Oh, it's horrible.
But for the most part, I mean, he had that same look to him. And Peter Davison had that same look to him. And Colin Baker had that same look to him. I mean, not same to each other, but like for themselves. I believe Ncuti Gatwa, before he changed outfits, was wearing something different than he was in the first episode.
He was wearing an orange shirt, a bright orange shirt.
Yeah, because in the first episode, he was wearing this
multicolored sweater.
Yeah. So even the way his wardrobe is handled is different than the other Doctors, because even Jodie Whittaker was wearing that ridiculous-looking Mork from Mork thing, but that was her signature outfit. And Ncuti Gatwa, I don't know if that's on purpose, maybe because 2 episodes in and he's not wearing the same... Actually, 3, because I think in the Christmas episode he had something completely different on, too.
He was wearing that leather jacket.
Well, yeah, he didn't have that sweater thing on he had from the first episode. I don't think so.
I don't recall what he was wearing underneath the jacket.
But it just seems like they're not giving the Doctor his traditional, you pick your look and you go with it. So it's a very disjointed thing they're doing. I mean, I don't know if that's an oversight by Russell or if he's doing that on purpose, because we talked about this in one of our anniversary reviews. Well, it might have been the Christmas review, actually. Is this leading up to him being shown to be the Valeyard. I don't know. I don't know if I'm reading too much into this. I might be staring at these tea leaves and it doesn't mean anything. But I do think that it's a valid observation to say the other doctors had a signature outfit to them, and so far Shooty does not.
It wouldn't surprise me if that's how it turns out. However, I'm not sure that that's such a great idea because you're just building this new audience on the Disney Plus platform. And that's a throwback to way back. And so even people who were just fans starting in 2005 aren't going to be familiar with that. So why would you throw that at even newer audiences starting now? I think that's a mistake if they choose to do that.
Why do the Big recreation? The scene from Big with the piano keys. That doesn't mean anything to young people. To give credit, this episode was less derived than the previous episode.
That's true.
Because we could make an argument and pick, I mentioned the Idiot's Lantern, and I could go through and mention a few others that had a little bit of a similar feeling, but it wasn't as strong as last episode where the end of the world, they were really borrowing heavy into that. And then Partners in Crime with the Adipose, there was a bit of that too, and then a little bit of Father's Day. Whereas this one, it was kind of spread across. I can't necessarily point and say, yeah, you're reusing this, and this, because even the stuff I'm mentioning from Idiot's Lantern, that could just be coincidental.
Yeah, that's true. Especially if he is doing the writing. As I said before, maybe he's just out of gas in his tank, and so he's got nothing other than his old ideas. I don't know.
There's still potential here for this to get better. And I say that because this episode was better than last episode. It's not good, but it's better. So maybe if we just give him a few more episodes, maybe he'll figure out what he's doing here, and maybe we'll start getting average episodes.
This was less childish, so I will definitely give it that. And like you said, I think the story was better than the previous episode. So we were wondering, how far do we continue with this? Well, this wasn't so bad that we're going to quit, so they get one more episode. We'll do one more episode.
I will restate the warning that I gave in the last video. Because of the content that they seem to want to introduce in these episodes, do not let your children watch these episodes alone. Even though I am trying to have some hope that they're trying to figure stuff out and these will get better, don't do that at the expense of your children. If you're a parent and your child wants to watch Doctor Who, watch it with them. I know it's still going to suck, but you need to make sure when your child has questions that the show is introducing that you're there to answer it, not the television.
Yeah, because, for instance, when they went back to 2024 and London had been destroyed by nuclear war, I wouldn't let my little kid sit there and watch that. That's not appropriate material.
Well, not for the 7-year-old audience that we said. We're pretty sure that's what they were aiming last episode. So if you're still catering to that 7-year-old audience, why would you introduce something like that?
No, this would have been incredibly inappropriate for children that age. So yeah, again, if I had kids, I would not be letting them watch this unattended, and I probably wouldn't let them watch it even with me there.
True, but if you get a kid bugging you, you're going to have to go along with the program eventually.
Well, and it depends on their age and their maturity level.
Or maybe a better thing to do would be, why don't you watch this ahead of time on the iPlayer on Saturday by yourself as a parent? And if it seems like it's something your kid might be okay with, then when it airs properly on the BBC, then you don't have to worry. But don't go and just ignore these episodes and say, it's meant for kids, my kid will be okay. It's like, I do not trust that.
No. So, I guess that's all I've got to say about that. So, all in all, it's getting better. However, still not that good. So
I'm interested in next week. Next week has Stephen Moffat. It'll be a little bit different take than what Russell's been doing. Let's see what happens. Maybe it'll continue to get better. Trying to be an optimist here. Maybe it'll get better.
A lot of shows start out rough. Maybe this is just one of them. Until next time.
Take care.